As Joel Simon, my colleague Joel Simon, was saying before, and this was emphasized by the presentation of the three Mexican colleagues, the issue of violence in Mexico has gone further beyond the press. In 2007, there were, according to official statistics, 2,500 execution-style murders related to organized crime, a number that can give you an idea of the magnitude of this problem. A problem, violence that has gone further beyond the press, and it's now inhibiting the ability of Mexicans to communicate between each other. And journalists are indulging in self-censorship in fear of reprisal. And this is creating a serious problem for Mexicans, for Mexican society, that are not being informed of very important issues that are affecting their daily lives, because journalists can not report on many of these stories because they are afraid to do it. Before giving the word, the microphone to the ambassadors, I would like to say a few words of what we'd like to hear from them today. From the Mexican side, would like to hear what can the Mexican federal government do to fulfill its constitutional responsibility to protect freedom of the press and create a safer environment for reporters to be able to do their jobs without fear of reprisal. And from Ambassador Kelly, the recognition that this problem of violence is a binational concern, and that the U.S. government is committed to work together with Mexican authorities in order to bring a solution to this problem. So, Ambassador Sarukhan, a great friend of CPJ, who is deeply committed to the press freedom issues. Go ahead.
Buenos dias. Thank you, Carlos, for the kind introduction. It's always an honor to be here at the Woodrow Wilson, and I'm glad that CPJ and the Woodrow Wilson have come together for what I think is a critically important issue that affects Mexico and the United States. I would also like to recognize and salute my Mexican colleagues from the press, and particularly, obviously, Leonardo, a friend of a long time ago, but in particular Daniel, Jorge, and Cesar for the brave work that they do on the trenches day in and day out in the struggle for Mexican society to take control of its peace, of its well-being. So I'm very glad that you're here. We're here to address what I think is a critical problem faced by Mexico and Mexican democracy today: violence against journalists. As the speakers that preceded me this morning have, I am sure, eloquently made clear, daily life in certain parts of the Mexican side of the border with the United States has sadly become, to put it mildly, a difficult proposition. The scale and the nature of the violence that we sometimes find in parts of this region has made simply going about one's daily business a hazardous operation. And few people know this better and are exposed to this violence as reporters living and working along the border region or in a temporary assignments there. The risks faced by them, as well as the editors and in some cases entire news organizations, have made the news business a heroic undertaking. Journalists are constantly followed, intimidated, and threatened. In some cases, as we all painfully know, they have even paid the ultimate price for simply doing their job, for daring to report crimes and denouncing the network of corruption and the very violence that has taken the lives of so many innocent civilians in the region. That the pursuit of truth should lead to death is indeed tragic and most worrying. Thus, it is not surprising that a highly detrimental environment of fear has begun to take over. This situation is very real and not easy to reverse. However, as what fuels this fear is the ruthlessness of what would appear to be all-powerful criminal organizations. Their tentacles have penetrated every nook and cranny of many a border community, corrupting not only policemen, judges, and government officials, but even in some cases, it has to be said, members of news organizations who unwittingly or willingly lose sight of the truth in exchange for an additional paycheck. In such an environment, some, not surprisingly and understandably, have chosen self-censorship. Rather than face constant intimidation and risk death, they have been forced to look the other way and write or report about other, less dangerous issues. The majority, however, refuse to look the other way. These are, without doubt, individuals of extraordinary bravery that we must all admire and honor. Yet we as a society cannot and must not solely rely on the bravery of a few individuals to find out what is happening outside our front door. The situation is not, of course, unique to Mexico. A similar state of affairs exists, for example, in Colombia today. During the 1980s, journalists covering the Red Brigades faced a comparable situation in Italy. Even countries that one would think exempt from such crimes have also been infected, as the tragic murder of Victoria Guerin in Ireland makes evident, Veronica Guerin in Ireland makes evident. Yet the fact that it happens, or has happened elsewhere, does not make it acceptable in Mexico or anywhere else. Being able to say that we suck less is not a way to spin the news. This is why, from day one of his administration, President Calderón has made clear that he will spare no effort to protect all Mexicans from the plague of organized crime and drug trafficking. Both the struggle and the President's commitment are very real and, in a certain sense, Churchillian. Mexico is paying its quota of blood, sweat, and tears. More than 2,500 individuals were killed in drug-related violence during President Calderón's first year in office, and over 250 police and military officers have lost their lives in this fight over the same period of time. Notwithstanding these losses, the President has remained determined to continue in this endeavor. Only last week, the presence of security forces in the Ciudad Juárez area, one of the deadliest and more violent in the country, was strengthened with a surge of 2,500 troops sent to tackle mounting violence between drug gangs. On the judicial front, both the executive and the legislative powers have been working together. Less than a month ago, Congress, working on a bill presented by the President, approved a constitutional amendment aimed at strengthening the judicial system and improving the legal framework to fight organized crime. This newly approved reform fulfills a campaign pledge by President Calderón to confront the public safety challenge faced by Mexico in a way that provides greater legal certainty for all citizens and ensures the accountability of law enforcement agencies, while at the same time enhancing and strengthening law enforcement capabilities. On journalism and journalist-specific issues, the Attorney General's office is pushing legislation that seeks to raise the profile of crimes against the press. The measure would make any attempt to interfere with the freedom of expression of journalists a federal crime. Also last year, President Calderón signed legislation that decriminalized libel, slander, and defamation at the federal level. This measure is an important step aimed at protecting journalists as they go about their business, and that builds upon the decision of the previous administration to create a special prosecutor to investigate crimes against journalists. No doubt much remains to be done. In particular, the Special Prosecutor's Office is still a relatively new institution that needs to consolidate itself and obtain the necessary tools in order to effectively perform its duties. Yet I am confident that it will do so in the very near future. And as we work to improve the situation for all journalists in Mexico, we both welcome and benefit from the critical role played by international organizations such as the Committee for the Protection of Journalists. Ladies and gentlemen, dear friends, liberal democracy has become increasingly consolidated in Mexico since 2000. In this process, the press has played and is playing a key role. We therefore cannot afford to leave reporters vulnerable to attacks or accept the self-censorship that often results from such attacks if we want to ensure a well-functioning and healthy democracy in Mexico. This may well be a difficult thing to ensure in the short term, especially in certain parts of the border. But ensure it we must. For as Edward R. Murrow once said, and I quote, "Difficulty is the excuse history will never accept." Thank you very much.
Thanks, Ambassador, for your words. Now it's the turn of Ambassador Kelly.
Thank you, Carlos. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm joined today by Elizabeth Wolfson from our Office of Mexican Affairs, and it's also a pleasure to see an old friend and colleague, Jeff Galvin, our press officer from our embassy in Mexico City. It's very inspiring to listen and to read about the stories told by Mexican journalists. They, like many of their colleagues around the world, including colleagues in the United States who in the past have covered difficult stories, dangerous stories, are shedding light into very dark corners. This takes courage, and as Arturo has said, some have paid with their lives. I would like today, in the few moments that I have, focus a little bit on some of the overall goals that the United States is trying to achieve in the region that have a very strong connection to the profession of journalism. As a diplomat who is married to a former journalist, I'm often struck by how our professions are similar. We both are in the information business, and we have the duty of following the truth wherever it may lead us and reporting that as faithfully as we can. And as a government, as the United States, which is heavily engaged in this hemisphere, we have a very strong focus on three goals, which I'd like to spell out, which I think have implications for journalists. The three I'd like to discuss are democracy, economic prosperity, and security. In democracy, one of our fundamental goals, working with our democratic friends in the region, is to strengthen, solidify, promote democratic institutions throughout the hemisphere. On September 11th, 2001, the OAS was gathered in Lima, Peru, a date which obviously became famous for other reasons because of the tragic attacks in New York and Washington. But that day, the OAS approved the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which states, "The peoples of the Americas have a right to democracy, and their governments have an obligation to promote and defend it. Democracy is essential for the social, political, and economic development of the peoples of the Americas." For democracy to thrive, information is absolutely essential. And therefore, in our efforts to promote democracy throughout the region, we put a heavy focus on programs, exchanges that promote journalism, because there's no such thing as opaque democracy. Democracy absolutely thrives on freedom of information. And so this is a major priority of ours as we work with our friends throughout the hemisphere. Secondly, economic prosperity. Modern markets, and if we look around the hemisphere, the good news from the hemisphere today is that the vast majority of the countries in our region are opening their doors to international trade, are seeking greater prosperity for their citizens, trying hard to lower poverty rates. And as we see, if we look at the countries that are doing this most successfully, they are seeing their poverty rates go down, and they are seeing prosperity spread to more and more people in their societies. This is very good news. There's obviously a long way to go, but it's one of this evolution toward greater prosperity in the region is one of the great stories of our neighborhood, of our hemisphere. But this too requires freedom of information, because cronyism and insider deals and those sorts of activities which cut people off and which create social exclusion. Journalism is the enemy of those activities, and journalists should be proud for shedding light on the sort of activities that reduce social inclusion, that keep people from sharing in this prosperity. Here, too, the United States, through many programs, including free trade agreements, our efforts to facilitate the sending of remittances from Latin American workers back home, foreign direct investment, private philanthropy, and many other programs. We are trying to make sure that all of our citizens in this hemisphere see the positive connection between, on the one hand, democracy and economic prosperity, and on the other hand, real changes in day-to-day lives. In other words, that democracy and open markets actually deliver the goods to real people. Finally, I want to touch on security. Carlos, you asked me about what the United States is doing along with Mexico and others along to address this problem. Obviously, for us to achieve the democracy and prosperity that we all want to see and that we have and are creating in the region, governments need to control their territory and free it from those who seek to use it for nefarious purposes. And this is why in certain parts of the hemisphere, including Colombia, we have dedicated significant resources to helping governments reclaim territory from narco-terrorists who seek to kill, to kidnap, to maim for their own selfish gains. Therefore, when President Bush met in Mérida in 2007 with President Calderón, and this idea of an initiative to work together to address these problems in Mexico and then, of course, as well in Central America, we have put together a very ambitious package to help. We see this as a very, very significant form of cooperation to work together on our common challenge along our border that involves drug trafficking and other forms of illegal activity. And the so-called Mérida initiative that we are currently developing with our Congress touches on all aspects of the problem, from sort of hardcore security to rule of law issues, training, forensics, screening at the border, many, many other activities, including the problem of gang violence. And so it's an ambitious, very positive program that we are committed to, and we see it as a great sign that the United States and Mexico and our friends in Central America want to come together to address these very, very difficult challenges. This, I think, Carlos, is partly an answer to your question, because the secure environment that we hope to create through the Mérida initiative along the border, but in other parts of Mexico and Central America, I think has direct relevance to the journalistic profession. We share your desire for greater security in your profession, and we hope that the Mérida initiative helps secure that. So, in closing, let me just say that, emphasize that you, the journalists, and we, the diplomats, have very similar goals as we try to solidify democracy and prosperity. Obviously, there's a creative tension between governments and journalists. That's a good thing. It's healthy that journalists criticize government and that we are forced to respond to constructive criticism in the press. This is a very healthy thing for democracy. But apart from any differences on individual issues, we share the overall goal, the goal that is expressed in the Inter-American Democratic Charter, which says, and I quote, "Freedom of expression and of the press are essential components of democracy." I think we agree on that sacred principle, and on this one we're definitely on the same page. So I salute the journalists who have faced dangers. We hope that our cooperation with Mexico helps address some of these issues. And as I might just touch on the point that Jorge Morales Borbón made about the story on this side of the border, we do dedicate significant resources to the consumption half of this equation in the United States, increasing resources. You're right to cite it. It is a problem, a big challenge for us, and another one that shows that we want to work in cooperation with our friends in Mexico. Thank you very much.
Thank Ambassador Sarukhan and Ambassador Kelly. Unfortunately, they won't be able to stay with us because they have other commitments, but we're very pleased to have you here. Thanks.
Thank you.
Final closing remarks from Leonardo Kurczyk.
Yes.
We're about to finish and to wrap it up. Just a few comments following the remarks made by Ambassador Sarukhan and Ambassador Kelly, y que creo que es importante para que todos tengamos esta fotografía global de lo que está pasando en México. En efecto, México está experimentando un proceso de transición democrática que está provocando grandes cambios en la cobertura mediática y en el rol y en la función que desempeñan los medios de comunicación en nuestro país. Hoy tenemos en México, y creo que es un análisis que comparten muchos analistas y especialistas, tenemos medios más sólidos, más libres, más independientes y más plurales. Esto es una realidad mexicana. Y al mismo tiempo que esto sucede, colegas periodistas en estados especialmente afectados por el crimen organizado y por los cárteles del tráfico de drogas están sufriendo atentados contra su ejercicio profesional, su ejercicio de libertad de expresión, contra sus vidas y su patrimonio. Esto es una realidad, ahí están las cifras y están los datos. Lo que se ha discutido aquí esta mañana se podría resumir como un llamado de conciencia que creo es extraordinariamente valioso que tenga lugar en este foro. Todos los que trabajamos en el negocio de la información sabemos que en Washington lo que se dice y lo que se declara tiene una repercusión y un eco distinto y diferente. Así es que se ha hablado aquí de la debilidad en las investigaciones y de este clima de impunidad por parte del aparato judicial. Investigaciones, hemos dicho, no ligadas a su trabajo periodístico, sino que con frecuencia son investigaciones que tienen que ver con asuntos de la esfera personal. No hay garantías para un trabajo periodístico en la cobertura de crimen organizado y de narcotráfico. Organizaciones, se ha pedido aquí, que no solo denuncien, sino que contribuyan a capacitar y a entrenar a periodistas en materia de seguridad. En México, hoy se vive incuestionablemente un clima de libertad de expresión que está siendo atentado y está siendo señalado por las organizaciones del crimen. En propuestas concretas se ha señalado aquí la combinación de investigaciones locales que puedan involucrar a autoridades federales para realizar investigaciones paralelas. El embajador Sarukhan acaba de señalar esta reforma reciente para tener mucha mayor certeza legal y jurídica en las investigaciones. No lo hemos logrado, no hemos triunfado en este objetivo, es un trabajo que tendrá que seguir. Hay que seguir ejerciendo presión política en los 3 niveles de gobierno, a nivel local, a nivel estatal y a nivel federal, para que estas investigaciones prosperen. Creo que estas serían, Dolia, Andrew, las conclusiones más importantes de lo que aquí se ha señalado. Me gustaría enfatizar que es muy valioso que podamos tener este tipo de debates en un foro como este. Felicidades al Woodrow Wilson Center. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Es un honor acompañar a colegas periodistas en este trabajo, en este debate continuo. Yo señalaba por ahí en algún momento que el ejercicio de autocrítica de los medios en México es terriblemente pobre. Nos cuesta mucho trabajo ver a la televisión y criticarla, y a la prensa y a la radio. Somos muy jóvenes en este asunto de tener medios plurales y transparentes, pero en ese camino vamos y creo que estamos avanzando. Muchas gracias a todos.
Gracias, Leonardo. Muchas gracias a todos y gracias a Leonardo. Y un último comentario a nivel de colegas. Aquí hay varios colegas de la prensa mexicana, de la prensa hispana, de la prensa de Estados Unidos, y obviamente una manera de mostrar solidaridad con este problema es dándole cobertura. Y sí los quiero exhortar a que publiquen los comentarios de nuestros colegas del norte, y es la manera en cómo se puede elevar la visibilidad de este problema de los ataques contra la prensa en México. Gracias por venir y todavía es mañana, buenos días.